Close your eyes now and let yourself drift back through the centuries, back to a time when the world moved at the pace of a donkey's gentle steps. Feel the warm desert wind as it whispers across endless dunes, carrying with it the faint sound of bells, teeny brass bells that jingle softly with each plodding step of a caravan making its way along the ancient silk routes. The year doesn't matter much. Could be the 7th century, could be the 12th. Time moves differently here in this place between sleep and waking, where history unfolds like a comfortable blanket. What matters is the rhythm, the steady, unhurried rhythm of commerce and culture flowing like honey along dusty roads that connected the known world. Imagine, if you will, a single candle flickering in the gathering dusk of a caravanserai. The flame dances gently in the evening breeze, casting long shadows across mud brick walls that have sheltered countless travelers. The light is warm and golden, illuminating the weathered faces of merchants who speak in hushed tones about their precious cargo. But these are not the dramatic tales of silk and spices you might expect. No, these are quieter stories, more soothing ones, stories about donkeys with patient eyes, rugs woven with dreams, and teapots that carry more than just tea. The silk roots, you see, were never really about silk alone. They're about connection, about the slow and steady exchange of the everyday items that made life beautiful. They stretched like sleeping serpents across deserts and mountains, from the markets of Constantinople to the tea gardens of China, from the carpet workshops of Persia to the pottery kilns of Central Asia. But tonight, we won't rush along these paths as conquering armies might have done. Instead, we'll move at the pace of understanding, the speed of a heavily laden donkey who knows that the journey matters more than the destination. Picture now a small caravan settling down for the night. The merchants have arranged their goods in neat piles around the courtyard of an inn whose name has been forgotten by history, but whose purpose remains eternal: to provide rest for the weary traveler. The donkeys stand in a row, their burdens finally lifted from their backs after a long day's journey. Their ears twitch occasionally at the sound of distant conversation, but their eyes are half closed in that peaceful way that donkeys have perfected over millennia. One donkey, perhaps a bit smaller than the others, carries bundles wrapped in rough cloth. Inside these bundles are carpets, not grand palace rugs, but simple, honest carpets woven by families in mountain villages. Each knot tied by fingers that knew the pattern by heart, each thread dyed with colors drawn from the earth itself. From madder root, blue from indigo leaves, yellow from saffron when times were good. These rugs will travel for months, growing softer with each mile, collecting dust and stories in equal measure. Near the small donkey, another beast of burden shifts its weight carefully. This one carries something that clinks very softly with each movement: ceramic teapots nested in straw and cloth, their glazed surfaces catching and holding the last light of day. Some are simple earthenware, the color of good soil after rain. Others gleam with a blue that rivals the deepest desert sky. Each one was shaped by a potter's hands, fired in kilns that burned wood gathered from distant forests, cooled slowly in the patient way that all good things must be made. The merchants themselves are settling now, unrolling their own sleeping mats, sharing simple meals of flatbread and dried fruit. They speak quietly among themselves in a mixture of languages: Persian, Arabic, Turkish, Chinese, but their words blend together into a gentle murmur that speaks of universal things: the condition of the roads ahead, the weather, the small, daily concerns that connect all human beings across time and culture. One merchant, his beard gray from years of desert dust, carefully unwraps a small teapot from his personal belongings. It's nothing fancy, just a simple clay vessel the color of autumn leaves. But it has traveled with him for 7 years now, through sandstorms and mountain passes, through bazaars loud with haggling voices and silent monasteries where monks offer shelter and ask nothing in return. He fills it with water from the well, adds a pinch of tea leaves that smell of distant mountains, sets it over a small fire that crackles with dried camel dung and desert shrubs. As the tea steeps, the merchant spreads out a small rug beside the fire. It's worn thin in places from countless nights like this one. Its colors faded but still beautiful in the firelight. The pattern tells a story of geometric stars and flowing vines, a story that began in the mind of a weaver who lived and died before this merchant was born, but whose artistry continues to provide comfort on cold desert nights. This is how the silk routes really worked. Not through grand gestures of diplomacy or conquest, but through these small, repeated acts of human necessity and kindness. A donkey's steady pace, a rug's patient warmth, a teapot's simple ritual of comfort. These were the true engines of cultural exchange. The quiet forces that carried ideas and artistry across continents at exactly the speed they needed to travel. Slowly enough to be absorbed, gently enough to be welcomed. The fire burns lower now, and the merchant sips his tea in contemplative silence. Round him, the caravan settles into sleep. The donkeys stand drowsing in their patient way, occasionally shifting their weight or blowing softly through their nostrils. The merchandise lies secure under starlight trugs and teapots. Brass bowls and ceramic tiles, leather goods and small wooden boxes carved with intricate designs. Each item carries within it not just the skill of its maker, but the dreams of its eventual owner, someone who lives perhaps 1,000 miles away, doesn't yet know that something beautiful is slowly making its way toward them. The night deepens, and the desert grows quiet except for the whisper of wind through the caravanserai walls and the distant call of a night bird. The merchant finishes his tea, rinses his small pot with precious water, carefully wraps it again in its protective cloth. Tomorrow, there will be another day of steady travel, another evening of quiet ritual, another night of rest under stars that have watched this same scene play out for centuries. But tonight, as you listen to this gentle tale, let yourself feel the peace of that ancient rhythm. The world moved slowly then, but it moved surely. The connections were made thread by thread, sip by sip, step by patient step. The donkeys knew this wisdom instinctively, that the most precious things in life cannot be rushed, that beauty travels at its own pace, that the journey itself is where the magic happens. Feel the warmth of that caravan fire beginning to fade now. The comfortable weight of a hand-woven blanket, the security of thick walls and fellow travelers nearby. The silk routes beckon ahead, stretching into dreams and distant lands, carried forward by creatures who understand that slow and steady wins not the race, but something far more valuable, the gradual, gentle exchange of all the small wonders that make life worth living. If the silk routes had a heart, it would beat at the rhythm of donkey hooves against packed earth. For beats, steady and sure, neither hurried nor hesitant. These remarkable creatures were the first true merchants of the ancient world. Though they never kept ledgers or counted coins, instead, they carried their wealth on their backs and in their boundless patience, moving precious cargo across impossible distances with the kind of quiet dignity that humans have spent millennia trying to master. Consider, as you settle deeper into comfort, a donkey named Well. Donkeys rarely had individual names in the historical records, which tells us something about how little humans understood their true importance. Let's call this particular donkey Kamar, after the Arabic word for moon, because like the moon, he was constant, reliable, and made his journey every night and day without fail. Kamar was what merchants called a 5-season donkey, meaning he had survived 5 full trading seasons on the silk routes, making him practically a senior partner in the caravan business. Kamar stood just over 3 feet tall at his sturdiest shoulders, with a coat the color of desert sand after raina, practical gray-brown that blended beautifully with the landscape he called home. His ears, magnificently long and expressive, could rotate independently like furry satellite dishes, constantly gathering information about the world around him. Merchants learned to read those ears like weather vanes. When Kamar's ears pointed forward, alert and interested, it meant good road ahead. When they swiveled backward, pressed close to his head, it was time to check for loose loads or approaching storms. What made donkeys like Kamar perfect for the silk routes was not their speed. Heaven knows they weren't fast, but their supernatural ability to carry exactly the right amount for exactly the right distance. A healthy donkey could bear about 60 pounds of cargo day after day, month after month, across terrain that would challenge modern vehicles. But more importantly, they seemed to understand the precious nature of what they carried. Kamar, for instance, had developed a special walking style for days when he carried ceramics. His steps became even more measured, his movements fluid as water, as if he intuited that sudden jolts might turn a masterpiece teapot into worthless shards. The merchants noticed this, though they couldn't quite explain it. "The donkey knows," they would say, patting Kamar's neck as he navigated a rocky descent with a load of delicate pottery balanced perfectly on his back. "The donkey always knows." And somewhere in the pattern of knots and colors, in the careful geometry of paradise interpreted through wool and dye, lies the essence of what made the silk routes possible. Not the dramatic exchange of rare luxuries, but the quiet sharing of human artistry, the gradual spreading of techniques and aesthetics that made the world more beautiful, one carpet at a time. As evening approaches and the light begins to fade, Nura completes another day's work on her masterpiece. She runs, her fingers once more along the growing edge, feeling the tight, even texture that speaks of work well done. Tomorrow she will continue, and the day after that, till the carpet is complete and ready for its journey into the wide world. But tonight, as you settle into rest, let yourself feel the comfort of her patient craft. The security of work that connects past and future, the warmth of artistry that transforms simple materials into objects of lasting beauty and meaning. In the pre-dawn darkness of a potter's workshop, where the air still holds the lingering warmth from yesterday's kiln firing, hands move with practiced certainty through clay that seems to know its destiny. The potter Ahmad, whose name means praised, though he works in quiet humility centers, a mound of clay on his wheel with the same reverence that monks show toward their morning prayers. This clay has traveled its own journey to reach his hands, gathered from riverbanks where the water runs slow and deposits the finest particles. Aged in underground pits for seasons until it develops the plasticity and patience that fine pottery requires. The wheel turns with a rhythm as steady as breathing, as constant as the rotation of the earth itself. Ahmed's hands cup the clay, feeling for the exact center. It's that perfect point of balance around which all good pottery must grow. His movements are economical, precise, learned through decades of partnership with clay and fire. He is making a teapot, not a grand ceremonial vessel, but a simple, economist pot that will carry tea along the silk routes, bringing comfort to travelers. In places where Ahmad's name will never be known, as the clay rises under his touch, Ahmad thinks about the journey this pot will take. He has made thousands of teapots over the years, each one slightly different, each one carrying his hopes for safe travel and good service. Some have returned to him as broken fragments in merchant caravans, casualties of rough roads or careless handling. But others have simply vanished into the vast network of trade routes, gone to serve tea in lands so distant they exist only in his imagination. The clay responds to his intentions, growing upward and outward in the classic bulbous shape that has proven itself over centuries of use. Not too round, which would make the pot unstable when filled. Not too tall, which would make it top-heavy and prone to tipping. The proportions emerge from knowledge passed down through generations of potters, refined by experience into forms that seem as natural and inevitable as the shapes of fruits or flowers. The spout requires particular attention. It must be long enough to pour cleanly, curved just so to prevent dripping, wide enough to allow the tea to flow freely, but not so wide that it gushes uncontrollably. Ahmad pulls it from the clay body with careful pressure, checking the angle against his thumb, testing the curve against the light from the workshop's small window. A good spout is poetry in clay, functional sculpture that transforms the simple act of pouring into a gesture of grace. The handle comes next. It's pulled from a separate piece of clay and attached with the kind of joint that will survive years of thermal expansion and contraction. It must be large enough for hands wearing winter gloves, positioned so that the weight of a full pot balances comfortably, shaped so that it doesn't conduct heat from the pot's body to the user's fingers. These considerations are second nature to Ahmad, built into his muscle memory. through years of making pots that actually work in the real world of travel and daily use. As the basic form takes shape, Ahmad considers the lid that crucial component that transforms a simple vessel into a proper teapot. The lid must fit snugly enough to keep the tea hot and prevent spilling during transport, but loosely enough to lift easily, even when the clay expands in the heat. The knob on top should be substantial enough to grasp securely, but not so large that it makes the pot unwieldy for packing. Like every element of a good teapot, the lid represents a perfect balance between competing requirements. The clay he's using today is local, dug from deposits near the city where generations of potters have found everything they need for their craft. It's a warm sandy color when wet, but Ahmed knows it will fire to a soft gray-brown that seems to hold light and warmth even when the pot is empty. This clay has particular qualities that make it perfect for teapots. It's refractory enough to withstand rapid temperature changes, porous enough to breathe and keep tea at the perfect serving temperature, and plastic enough to form thin walls that heat quickly and evenly. But clay is only half of a potter's art. The other half is fire, that mysterious alchemy that transforms soft, formable earth into hard, durable ceramic. Ahmed's kiln is built into the hillside behind his workshop, constructed of fire bricks made from the same clay he uses for his pots. It's a climbing kiln, designed so that the heat moves upward through a series of chambers, each one reaching a slightly different temperature, creating subtle variations in color and texture that make his pots distinctive in the markets where they're sold. Loading the kiln is an art in itself. Each pot must be positioned to receive the right amount of heat and flame, protected from direct contact with fire, but exposed enough to develop the surface qualities that make good pottery beautiful as well as functional. Ahmad uses small clay supports called stilts to keep his teapots level. He places them with the kind of attention that chess masters give to positioning their pieces. The firing process takes 3 days. 1 day for the temperature to climb, gradually from cold to the white-hot intensity that transforms clay into ceramic. 1 day at peak temperature, where the real magic happens, and 1 day for slow cooling that prevents the thermal shock that can crack even perfectly made pots. During this time, Ahmad tends his kiln like a doctor, caring for a patient, monitoring the color of the flames, adjusting the airflow, feeding measured amounts of fuel to maintain the precise conditions his pots require. What emerges from the kiln? After this trial by fire is pottery that seems to glow from within. Clay that has been transformed into something both earthier and more refined than its original state. The teapots have a soft, matte surface that invites touch, a subtle color that seems to change with the light, and most importantly, that indefinable quality that potters call ring, the clear, bell-like sound that good ceramic makes when tapped gently with a fingernail. But a teapot's real life begins when it leaves the potter's workshop and enters the world of the silk roots. Packed carefully in straw and cloth, nested with others of its kind in wooden crates, designed to protect them from the shocks and vibrations of long-distance travel. Ahmad's pots begin their transformation from mere objects into partners in the ancient ritual of hospitality. Imagine one particular teapot, let us call it the travel, making its way slowly eastward in a caravan bound for the tea-growing regions of distant mountains. The traveler has never held tea. It knows only the maker's hands and the kiss of fire, but it carries within its ceramic memory the potential for thousands of perfect cups. Countless moments of refreshment and reflection. The traveler's first taste of tea comes in a mountain caravanserai, where the merchant who owns it decides to test his new merchandise. The tea is a simple green variety, leaves picked from bushes that grow wild on the steep slopes where the air is thin and pure. The merchant fills the traveler with mountain spring water, adds a generous pinch of the pale green leaves, sets it over a small fire built from dried yak dung, a fuel that burns clean and hot in the oxygen-starved air of high altitude. As the water heats, the traveler experiences its first lesson in the physics of tea making. The clay walls conduct heat evenly, warming the tea leaves gradually so that they release their essence without bitterness. The lid fits perfectly, keeping the heat in while allowing just enough air circulation to prevent the tea from becoming stewed and harsh. The spout pours in a smooth arc, delivering exactly the right amount of tea to the merchant's waiting cup. This first brewing is a moment of mutual recognition. The traveler discovers its purpose, while the merchant recognizes that he has acquired a pot of exceptional quality. The tea tastes better than it should, cleaner, more aromatic, subtle flavors that seem enhanced by the simple earthenware vessel. This is the alchemy that happens when good clay meets good tea. Each improves the other, creating something greater than the sum of their parts. Over the months that follow, as the caravan makes its way through mountain passes and desert crossings, the traveler becomes seasoned in the art of tea making. Each brewing adds to its understanding. Different teas require different approaches. Different waters bring out different flavors. Different altitudes and climates affect the delicate balance between heat and time that creates perfect tea. The merchant, meanwhile, has begun to appreciate the subtle ways that his earthenware pot improves with use. The clay gradually absorbs trace amounts of tea oils, developing what tea masters call patina, a microscopic seasoning that enhances each subsequent brewing. The traveler is becoming more than just a vessel. It's becoming a partner in the tea-making process, contributing its own accumulated wisdom to each pot of tea. When the caravan finally reaches the great tea markets, the traveler has completed its education in the fundamentals of its craft. It has learned to work with mountain spring water and desert well water, with green teas and black teas, with the quick brewings preferred by hurried merchants and the long contemplative steepings favored by philosophers and monks. Each experience has been absorbed into its ceramic memory, making it a more skillful and reliable servant. The tea markets. The selves are temples to the art of patient brewing. Here, merchants sample their potential purchases using ceremonies that have remained unchanged for centuries. Water is heated to precise temperatures, cooler for delicate green teas, hotter for robust black varieties. Measurements are exact, timing is critical, and the quality of the teapot is as important as the quality of the tea itself. When the traveler is used in these ceremonies, it performs with the quiet confidence of an instrument that has found its perfect application. The tea it brews carries no off flavors from inferior clay or poor firing. Its heat retention is perfect, keeping the tea at the optimal serving temperature without continuing to extract tannins that would make it bitter. Its proportions create exactly the right ratio between tea and airspace, allowing the leaves to expand fully while maintaining the proper concentration of flavor. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Traveland, indeed about all, the humble teapots that serve the silk routes, is how it facilitates human connection across cultural boundaries. Tea drinking is one of humanity's most universal rituals. It's practiced in different forms by peoples separated by thousands of miles and centuries of history. A good teapot speaks a language that needs no translation, creating moments of peace and hospitality that transcend all other differences. In a Chinese monastery, the traveler might serve tea to traveling monks who sit in silent meditation, grateful for the simple pleasure of warm tea after a long day's journey. In a Persian merchant's house, it might grace a formal reception where business deals are negotiated slowly, over multiple rounds of perfectly brewed teas served in delicate glasses. In a Mongol encampment, it might provide the centerpiece for a gathering where stories are told, in friendships formed around the universal comfort of shared tea. Each of these encounters adds to the traveler's accumulated wisdom. Like the carpets that grow more beautiful with age and use, like the donkeys that develop deeper understanding of their roots and cargo, the teapot becomes more valuable through service. Its clay darkens slightly from repeated heating. Its surface develops the subtle patina that marks a vessel well used and well loved, and its performance improves with each brewing. This is the true magic of the objects that traveled the silk routes. They were designed not just to survive the journey, to be improved by it. The traveler returns to market seasoned by experience, carrying in its ceramic memory the taste of waters from a dozen different springs. The wisdom gained from brewing teas grown in a score of different climates, the accumulated knowledge of hundreds of perfect cups served to grateful travelers. And when evening falls along the ancient trade routes, when merchants gather around their fires to share the day's experiences and plan tomorrow's journey. The sight of steam rising from a well-made teapot becomes a symbol of all that makes travel worthwhile. Not the exotic luxuries or the promise of profit, but these simple, perfect moments of comfort and connection that remind travelers of their common humanity. The traveler sits now at the center of such a scene, its earthenware body glowing softly. In the firelight, steam rising from its spout in gentle spirals that seem to carry with them all the hopes and dreams of the road. The tea it contains has traveled from distant mountains. The water came from a spring blessed by centuries of travelers' prayers, and the moment of peace it creates will be remembered long after the caravan has moved on and the fire has burned. To Ashdod, this is the true language that teapots speak along the silk routes, not words, but the wordless communication of comfort offered and gratefully received, of hospitality extended across all boundaries of culture and belief, of the simple human pleasure found in a perfect cup of tea brewed in a vessel made with skill and served with love, as the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of amber and rose. The caravan quickens its pace ever so slightly. The donkeys sense it first, their ears prick forward, steps become more purposeful, and Kamar releases a soft snort of satisfaction that says, clearer than words, that rest and shelter lie ahead. The merchants feel it too, that subtle shift in the quality of light and air that means they will reach the caravanserai before full darkness falls across the ancient roads. The Khani, or the Inn of Light, appears first as a distant smudge against the desert floor, its mud brick walls so perfectly matched to the color of earth and stone that it seems to grow naturally from the landscape itself. As the caravan draws closer, details emerge like a slowly developing dream. The massive wooden gates that have welcomed travelers for 3 centuries. It's the watchtower where a guard keeps eternal vigil. The thin column of smoke that rises from the communal kitchens where the evening meal is, already beginning to simmer in great copper pots. The gates stand open in the universal gesture of hospitality. It's flanked by carved stone lions whose faces have been worn smooth by countless desert storms, but whose eyes still hold the watchful dignity of guardians. Above the entrance, calligraphy in flowing Arabic script offers the traditional blessing: enter in peace, depart in safety, and may your journey be blessed by the Almighty. These words have been spoken in a dozen languages by travelers from every corner of the known world. But their meaning remains constant. Here is sanctuary, here is rest. Here is the temporary home that makes all journeys possible. Hassan guides Kamar through the gates and into the central courtyard, that magical space that transforms a simple building into a universe of comfort and possibility. The courtyard is vast enough to accommodate 100 travelers and their animals, yet intimate enough that conversations carry easily from one side to the other. The walls rise on 4 sides, pierced by doorways that lead to sleeping chambers, storage rooms, and the various workshops and services that make a caravanserai a complete world unto itself. At the center of the courtyard stands the well, not just a source of water, but the heart around which all life in the caravanserai revolves. It's surrounded by a low stone wall, worn smooth by centuries of elbows and buckets, and the sound of water being drawn up from its depths provides a constant soothing rhythm that underlies all other activity. The water itself is sweet and cold, filtered through layers of sand and stone until it achieves that perfect clarity that makes travelers understand why water was considered more precious than gold along the ancient trade routes. The evening ritual of arrival begins with the care of the animals. Kamar and his companions are led to the long covered portico that runs along the eastern wall, where wooden posts provide secure tethering points and stone mangers hold the evening ration of barley and dried dates. The donkeys settle into their temporary stalls with the satisfied sighs of travelers who have earned their rest, occasionally lifting their heads to watch the human activity around them with those large, intelligent eyes that seem to understand everything and judge nothing. Hassan unloads Kamar's cargo with the practiced efficiency of someone who has performed this ritual hundreds of times, but also with the careful attention that expensive merchandise requires. Each carpet is checked for damage, each teapot examined for cracks or chips that might have developed during the day's journey. The goods are then carried to Hassan's assigned storage room, one of dozens of identical chambers that line the caravanserai's walls like cells in a monastery. Devoted to the worship of commerce, these storage rooms are marvels of practical architecture. Designed by builders who understood the specific needs of traveling merchants, the walls are thick enough to maintain stable temperatures regardless of outside weather. The floors are slightly raised to protect against dampness and vermin. The doors are fitted with locks that have been tested by centuries of suspicious merchants and would-be thieves. Each room contains simple furnishings, a wooden platform for sleeping, niches in the walls for personal belongings, and hooks for hanging robes and saddlebags. As Hassan arranges his merchandise and prepares his modest quarters for the night, the caravanserai fills with the gentle sounds of evening settlement. Other merchants call greetings to old friends and introduce themselves to new acquaintances. Camels groan and sigh as their loads are removed, their complaints mixing with the softer sounds of donkeys and horses being fed and watered. Somewhere in the distance, a flute plays a melody that might be Turkish or Persian or Chinese along the silk routes. Music, like commerce, recognizes no boundaries. Their daily routine was as comforting as it was efficient. Before dawn, while the desert air still carried the cool breath of night, Kamar would wake naturally, not with an alarm or a master's call, but with the internal clock that every successful caravan animal possessed. He would stand quietly, ears alert, listening to the subtle sounds that meant morning was approaching. The shift in wind direction, the first stirring of other animals, the barely audible footsteps of early rising merchants beginning their morning rituals. Loading was a ceremony of trust between donkey and human. Kamar knew to stand perfectly still while his pack saddle was positioned and adjusted. The merchants had learned to work around his preferences. He didn't mind heavy loads, but he absolutely refused to carry anything that smelled strongly of certain spices. Asafetida, in particular, sent him into fits of stubborn refusal that could delay a caravan for hours. But give him a load of carpets, with their pleasant wool smell and familiar weight, and he would practically purr with satisfaction. The carpets, in fact, seemed to understand donkeys as well as donkeys understood them. Both were products of patience and careful craftsmanship. A fine carpet might take months to weave with its maker working in the same methodical rhythm that Kamar used for walking steady. Sure, never rushing, never stopping. When folded and wrapped for transport, carpets created exactly the kind of soft, evenly distributed load that donkeys preferred. It was as if weavers had designed their masterpieces, not just for eventual floors and walls, but for the comfort of the animals who would carry them to their destinations. Kamar had his favorite types of cargo, though he was professional enough never to refuse reasonable loads. Teapots were interesting to him. They clinked softly as he walked, creating a gentle percussion that seemed to help him maintain his rhythm. The sound was like a meditation bell marking each step of the journey, with tiny ceramic chimes. Sometimes when the caravan stopped for rest, merchants would notice that Kamar positioned himself where he could hear the soft sounds his teapots made when the wind caught them just right. But it was the relationship between donkey and merchant that truly made the silk routes possible. These were partnerships built on mutual respect and deep understanding. Kamar's merchant, a soft-spoken man named Hassan, who traded in textiles and small luxury goods, had learned to read his donkeys' moods and preferences as carefully as he read market conditions. He knew that Kamar walked better in the morning after a handful of dates, that he preferred to drink from moving water rather than still pools, and that he became nervous around certain types of camels, but got along beautifully with horses. Hassan also knew that Kamar possessed what merchants called route memory, the ability to remember not just paths and landmarks, but the quality of water sources, the reliability of different caravanserais, and even the fairness of various market towns. More than once, Hassan had followed Kamar's judgment about which fork in a road to take, and the donkey's choice invariably led to better conditions and more honest treatment. During the long walking hours, which might stretch from sunrise to sunset with only brief stops for rest and water, Kamar entered a kind of moving meditation. His breathing became deep and regular, his eyes half closed, but still alert to the road ahead. The weight on his back became part of him, and he moved, as if he and his cargo were a single entity designed specifically for this purpose. Merchants often remarked that a well-trained donkey in full stride was one of the most graceful sights in the world. Perfect harmony of purpose and motion. The stubbornness that donkeys were famous for was actually a form of wisdom that merchants came to appreciate. When Kamar planted his feet and refused to move, it was never mere contrariness. Sometimes he sensed unstable ground that looked safe to human eyes. Sometimes he detected the scent of predators or bandits that human noses couldn't perceive. Sometimes he simply knew that his load had shifted in a way that would cause injury if he continued without adjustment. Hassan learned to trust these moments of donkey wisdom. And over 5 seasons of partnership, Kamar's stubbornness had prevented countless accidents and mishaps. At night, when the caravan settled into rest, Kamar had his own rituals. After being unloaded and brushed down, after drinking deeply and eating his evening portion of grain and dates, he would position himself where he could keep one eye on his merchant and one eye on his carefully stored cargo. Donkeys were natural guardians, and many a thief discovered that stealing from a caravan meant dealing not just with human watchmen, but with alert, protective animals who considered the merchandise under their personal care. Kamar would doze, standing up the way donkeys do, dropping into deeper sleep only when he was certain all was well. Even then, his sleep was light and attentive. The slightest unusual sound, a rope shifting against a different knot, a piece of pottery settling in its wrapping would bring his ears forward and his eyes open, checking that his precious cargo remained secure. What merchants understood, and what made the silk routes possible, was that donkeys like Kamar weren't just transportation, they were partners in a vast enterprise of cultural exchange. Every careful step carried more than goods, from one place to another. It carried techniques and ideas, stories and songs, tastes and textures that would blend and merge and create new forms of beauty in distant markets. A teapot that began its journey in the skilled hands of a Chinese potter would travel on Kamar's back for months, picking up the subtle influence of the journey itself. By the time it reached a merchant's stall in Constantinople, it carried not just its maker's artistry, but the entire experience of the road, the patience of the donkey who bore it, the care of the merchant who protected it, the gradual seasoning of desert air and mountain winds that somehow made foreign objects feel perfectly at home in new places. This was the true genius of the donkey-powered silk routes. They operated at exactly the right speed for transformation. Ideas and aesthetics need time to mature and adapt. A carpet pattern that looked foreign and strange in its home village might seem perfectly natural and beautiful after traveling slowly across continents in the gentle rhythm of donkey steps. The journey itself became part of the creation process, with each mile adding layers of meaning and cultural resonance. As dawn approaches in our imagined caravanserai, Kamar stirs naturally from his light sleep. His internal clock, refined by seasons of travel, tells him it's time to prepare for another day of patient progress. He stretches in the thorough way that donkeys do, each muscle and joint receiving attention, preparing for the long walk ahead. Hassan approaches with the morning handful of dates and a gentle pat on the neck that means good morning. Old friend, ready for another day of wonders? The cargo waits nearby rugs and teapots, ceramic bowls and silk scarves, brass instruments, and carved wooden boxes. Each item will spend the day swaying gently with Kamar's measured steps, settling into the rhythm that connects distant places and different peoples. The donkey knows his role in this ancient dance of commerce and culture. He is the steady heartbeat that keeps the silk routes alive, the patient foundation upon which empires of beauty and connection are built. And so, as Kamar prepares for another day of carrying the world's treasures at exactly the right speed, let yourself feel the comfort of that steady rhythm, for beats against packed earth, reliable as sunrise, gentle as the desert wind that carries the sound of distant bells. The donkeys of the silk routes knew something that our hurried modern world has forgotten, that the most precious things in life travel best at the pace of patience. Carried with care, delivered with the quiet dignity that transforms simple transportation into something approaching art. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and morning, a weaver sits at her loom in a village whose name changes with the language of whoever speaks it. Her fingers move in a rhythm older than memory, older than the silk roots themselves, creating knot by careful knot a story that will outlive empires. This is where our carpets begin their journey, not in grand workshops or royal manufactories, but in the gentle patience of hands that know no other way to speak than through wool and silk, dye and design. The loom itself is a simple thing made of wood polished smooth by generations of weavers. It stretches the warped threads like the strings of a musical instrument, each one tuned to exactly the right tension. To loose, and the carpet will be weak and uneven. To tight, and the threads will snap under the constant pressure of the weaving process. The weaver, let us call her Nura, which means light in the old language, has inherited this loom from her grandmother, who inherited it from her grandmother before her. Each woman has left her mark in the worn smoothness of the wood. In the slight adjustments made to accommodate different heights and preferences, Nura begins her day's work as she always does, by running her fingers along the growing edge of the carpet. 3 months of work lie beneath her touch. 3 months of early mornings and evening sessions, of careful color planning and patient execution. The carpet is telling the story of a garden, but not any garden that exists in the physical world. This is the Garden of Paradise, interpreted through symbols and patterns that stretch back through centuries of tradition. The background is a deep, rich red knot, the bright red of fresh blood, but the warm red of pomegranate seeds, of sunset on desert cliffs, of the interior of a tent lit by oil lamps on a winter evening. This red came from madder root, gathered from hillsides where the plant grows wild and free, dried in the sun until it becomes almost black, then ground and boiled into a dye that penetrates wool fibers with a permanence that defies centuries. Nura's grandmother taught her the secret of madder red. It must be harvested when the moon is full, and the dyeing must be done with water from a spring, never from a well. Against this red background, flowers bloom in careful symmetry. Not realistic flowers, but the essence of flowers translated into geometric form. A tulip becomes a graceful curve topped by 3 small points. Rose transforms into a hexagonal star surrounded by smaller stars. A cypress tree, symbol of eternal life, rises in a slender column of green knots, each one tied with the same tension. The same careful attention that ensures the tree will stand straight and tall for centuries to come. The green of the cypress comes from indigo, mixed with yellow saffron indigo for the blue depth of truth, saffron for the yellow warmth of joy. But saffron is precious, more valuable than silver, gathered one flower at a time during the brief harvest season, when the purple crocuses bloom in mountain meadows. Nura uses it sparingly, mixing it with cheaper yellow dyes made from pomegranate, rind and turmeric, but always adding enough of the real saffron to give her greens that particular luminous quality, makes them seem to glow from within. As her fingers work, selecting each strand of wool, judging its color in the morning light, checking its texture and strength, Nura enters the meditative state that all master weavers know. Her breathing slows to match the rhythm of her hands. Tie, tighten, cut, move to the next knot. The pattern exists in her mind, complete and perfect, learned through years of practice until it becomes as natural as walking or breathing. She doesn't need to count stitches or refer to drawings. The carpet grows under her hands like a living thing, following laws as natural and inevitable as the growth of trees or the flow of rivers. This particular carpet is destined for the silk routes, though Nura doesn't know its final destination. It might end up in a merchant's house in Samarkand, where it will warm floors of marble and stone. It might travel all the way to Constantinople, where it will grace the reception room of a wealthy trader in spices and silk. Way to a monastery in the mountains, where monks will kneel on it during their prayers. adding their devotions to the sacred geometry of its design. What Nura does know is that her carpet must be perfect for the journey ahead. Rugs that travel, the silk roots face challenges that would destroy lesser textiles. They must be strong enough to survive months of being folded and unfolded, loaded and unloaded from donkey backs and camel humps. They must be dense enough to resist the invasion of desert sand and mountain dust. They must be dyed with colors that won't fade under the relentless sun of the high passes or the humid heat of the lowland rivers. Most importantly, they must carry within their fibers something that speaks to the human heart across all barriers of language and culture. A good silk root carpet is a universal language, speaking of home and comfort and beauty in terms that need no translation. When a merchant unrolls such a carpet in a foreign market, he doesn't need to explain its value. The carpet explains itself through the quality of its making, the harmony of its design, the way it transforms any space into a place of dignity and peace. The wool itself has traveled its own journey before reaching Nuro's hands. It came from sheep that graze the high pastures where the air is thin and clean, where the grass grows slowly and the water runs pure from mountain springs. These sheep grow fleece that is both strong and soft, with fibers long enough to create the durability that silk root carpets require. The wool was sheared in spring when the fleece is at its finest. Washed in running water with soap made from desert plants, combed and spun by hand into yarn of consistent thickness and strength. Each color requires its own ritual of preparation. The madder red that forms the background of Nura's carpet began as dried roots soaked in water for 3 days and boiled slowly while she stirred with a wooden paddle worn smooth by years of use. The wool was treated first with alum, a mineral that opens the fibers to receive the dye. Then immersed in the madder bath for hours, while the color gradually penetrated each strand. The process cannot be hurried. Madder red develops its full depth and permanence only through patience and time. The blue threads that form the border pattern came from indigo cakes, precious blocks of concentrated dye that traveled the silk roots themselves, carried by merchants who knew their value in the markets of the world. Indigo dyeing is an art of timing and temperature, of knowing exactly when the dye bath has reached the perfect moment for accepting wool. Too early, and the blue will be weak and patchy. Too late, and it will be so dark as to appear almost black, losing the clarity that makes good blue so prized. As the morning advances and the light grows stronger, Nura can better judge the subtle variations in her colors. A good carpet weaver develops an eye for color that surpasses that of painters or jewelers. She can detect the slightest variation in hue, the smallest difference in saturation. Each knot must match perfectly with its neighbors, creating smooth transitions and clean edges that will remain crisp. Even after years of use, the pattern itself carries meaning that extends far beyond mere decoration. The central medallion of Nura's carpet represents the sun, source of all life and energy. The smaller medallions that surround it are moons and stars, creating a cosmic map of the heavens as understood by her ancestors. The border patterns show the 4 rivers of paradise, flowing with geometric precision around the edges of the design. Every element has its place and purpose, creating a harmony that reflects the underlying order of the universe itself. But the most remarkable thing about Nura's carpet, and indeed about all the great carpets that traveled the silk routes, is how it manages to be both deeply rooted in tradition and completely personal to its maker. The basic patterns have been woven for centuries, passed down through generations of women who learned at their mother's looms, yet each weaver brings her own touch, her own interpretation, her own small innovations that keep the tradition alive and growing. Nura's personal signature lies in the way she handles the small flowers that fill the spaces between the major design elements. Her flowers have a particular grace, a slight asymmetry that makes them seem to move and breathe within the geometric structure of the overall pattern. This is her gift, her contribution to the great conversation of weavers that extends across centuries and continents. Future weavers will see her carpets and learn from her innovations, incorporating her discoveries into their own work. keeping the language of rugs alive and evolving. As the sun climbs higher, Nura pauses in her work to prepare tea. This, too, is part of the ritual of carpet making, the regular breaks for nourishment and reflection that prevent the mind from becoming too focused. 8. While the tea steeps in her small earthenware pot, she walks around her loom, viewing her work from different angles, checking for any irregularities or problems that need attention. The tea she drinks is itself a product of the silk roots, leaves, that grew in distant mountains and traveled in ceramic containers on the backs of patient donkeys. As she sips the warm, fragrant liquid, Nura thinks about the journey her carpet will soon undertake. It will be carefully cleaned and finished, its loose ends trimmed and secured. It will be folded with sheets of cotton to prevent creasing, wrapped in oiled leather to protect it from moisture, and bundled with other carpets for the long journey to market. Along the way, it will accumulate the subtle influences of travel, the scent of desert winds, the blessing of mountain air, the good wishes of merchants and travelers who appreciate fine craftsmanship. By the time it reaches its final destination, it will carry not just the artistry of its maker, but the entire experience of the silk roots themselves. It will be a carpet that has truly seen the world, seasoned by a journey into something even more beautiful than when it left the loom. In the market, where it will eventually be sold, merchants will unroll it slowly, allowing potential buyers to appreciate the quality of its making. They will comment on the fineness of the knots, the clarity of the colors, the harmony of the design. But what they're really responding to is something deeper, the way this carpet speaks the universal language of home and beauty, the way it transforms any space into a place worthy of respect and attention. The buyer who eventually purchases Nura's carpet will likely never know her name or see the village where it was made. But every time they walk across its surface or sit beside its warmth, they will participate in the ancient conversation between maker and user that is the true purpose of all fine crafts. The carpet will provide not just physical comfort, but spiritual nourishment, the daily reminder that human beings are capable of creating beauty, that patience and skill can produce objects worthy of reverence and love. As evening approaches, and the caravan begins to look for the next caravanserai or suitable camping spot, the daily rhythm completes itself in preparation for another cycle of rest and renewal. The merchandise has been tested once again by travel, and found worthy. The animals have proven their endurance and reliability. The merchants have advanced one day closer to their destinations, carrying with them not just goods, but the experiences and insights that transform simple traders into ambassadors of culture and understanding. Kamar's bells jingle softly in the evening air as he anticipates the comfort of another night's rest. Another opportunity to set down his precious burden and receive the care and attention that his faithful service deserves. The carpets on his back have absorbed another day's worth of desert winds and mountain air. Another increment in the slow transformation that will make them perfect for their future homes. The teapots have survived another day's testing, proving, once again, their fitness for the demanding life of service that awaits them. This is the endless rhythm of the silk roots, departure and arrival. Loading and unloading, the steady accumulation of miles that connects the scattered oases of civilization across the vast spaces of the ancient world. It's a rhythm that respects the natural pace of understanding, that allows cultures to meet and mingle gradually, that gives precious things the time they need to travel from creation to appreciation at exactly the speed that preserves their beauty and meaning. Tomorrow will bring another day of the same patient progress, another opportunity for wonder and hardship in equal measure. Another step in journeys that may take months or years to complete, but that create connections lasting. For centuries, the roads stretch endlessly ahead, ribbons of possibility that bind the world together, one careful step at a time. Carried forward by the willing feet of animals, who understand that the most precious things in life cannot be rushed, only savored. In the fullness of their own perfect time, the great caravans that once thundered across the silk routes didn't vanish overnight, like smoke dissipating in the wind. No, their disappearance was far more gentle than that, a slow, almost imperceptible fading. Like the last light of dusk, gradually surrendering to the comfort of night. Picture, if you will, the final donkey train making its way along a path that had been worn smooth by countless hooves over 1,000 years. The lead donkeys belled that same bronze bell that had once rung out clear and proud across desert valleys, now produced only the softest of chimes. Each step seemed more labored, not from the weight of silk or spices, but from the growing realization that fewer and fewer travelers were choosing these ancient roads. The merchant walking alongside this modest caravan was perhaps the grandson of a man who had once commanded trains of 300 animals. But times had changed with the persistence of shifting sands. Ships now carried goods faster across vast oceans, their holds capable of storing what would have required dozens of donkeys to transport. The maritime routes offered something the desert paths never could: predictability, and the promise of arrival without the constant negotiation with weather. Bandits, and the endless patient hunger of the desert itself, in the bazaars of Samarkand. Once the beating heart of Silk Route commerce, the change was as visible as dust motes settling. In afternoon sunlight, where carpet merchants had once displayed their finest works, rugs whose patterns told stories of distant kingdoms and whose colors rivaled the most spectacular sunsets, now only a few elderly craftsmen remained, their fingers still nimble, but their customers increasingly rare. One such merchant, Ahmad, had inherited his stall from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him. The wooden framework was worn smooth by generations of hands, and the carpets hanging from its beams had begun to gather the finest layer of dust. Not the dust of neglect, mind you, but the dust of a changing world. Ahmad would still arrive each morning brewing tea in the same copper pot his grandfather had used, arranging his rugs with the same careful attention to color and pattern. But where once the morning would bring a steady stream of caravan leaders examining his wares, now he might see only 2 or 3 serious buyers in an entire week. The most heartbreaking sight is the stack of prayer rugs in the corner of his stall. These were masterpieces of the weaver's art, each one containing months of careful work, each knot tied with the reverence befitting something that would serve as a bridge between earth and heaven. But the pilgrims who once sought out such treasures for their journeys to Mecca were now taking faster routes, and local worshippers seemed content with simpler, less expensive alternatives. Ahmad would sometimes hold one of these rugs up to the light, running his weathered fingers along the intricate borders, feeling the slight variations in texture that spoke of the weaver's individual touch. He could read these rugs like books, seeing in their patterns the influences of Persian courts, Chinese silk, and Indian dyes. Each one was a small museum of cultural exchange, a tangible record of the great mixing of peoples and ideas that had once defined these routes, but perhaps nowhere the decline more poignantly felt than in the tea houses that dotted the caravan stops. These establishments had served as more than mere rest stops. They had been the informal centers of communication, where news traveled faster than any official messenger service, where deals were struck over endless glasses of mint tea, and where stories accumulated like layers of sediment in a riverbed. The tea housekeeper in the oasis town of Turpin still maintained his ancient ritual each evening. As the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, he would light the charcoal brazier beneath his largest samovar. The brass vessel, polished to a mirror shine, had been crafted in Isfahan 2 centuries earlier and had served tea to merchants from every corner of the known world. The sound of water beginning to simmer was a sound that had marked the end of traveling days for countless generations. But now, instead of the excited chatter of merchants comparing the prices of silk in different cities or the animated discussions of travelers sharing news from distant lands, there was often only the gentle conversation of local farmers and craftsmen. They were good people, certainly, and their patronage kept the tea house alive. But their concerns were necessarily smaller: the local harvest, the health of their animals, the small dramas of village life. The tea housekeeper, whose name was Mahmud, had developed a habit of preparing far more tea than his current clientele required. Perhaps it was muscle memory, or perhaps it was a quiet act of faith, a belief that if he prepared enough tea, the old travelers might somehow materialize to drink it. Each evening, he would set out his finest glasses, the ones with the delicate blue patterns that had come from Venetian traders decades earlier. Most nights, many of these glasses would remain untouched, catching the lamplight like small, hopeful stars. The caravanserai themselves told the most melancholy stories of all. These fortress-like structures, built to accommodate hundreds of travelers and their animals, now stood largely empty. Their massive gates, designed to be closed against sandstorms and bandits, often remained open simply because there was nothing left to protect. The courtyards that had once echoed with the voices of merchants haggling in a dozen different languages now hosted only the occasional shepherd seeking shelter for the night. In the great caravanserai of Merv, the caretaker continued to maintain the building as if a caravan might arrive at any moment. He swept the floors of the guest quarters, checked that the water systems were functioning, and kept oil in the lamps. The building could easily house 200 travelers, but on most nights, he was its only occupant. Still, he performed his duties with the same diligence his predecessors had shown when the place bustled with activity. The animals, too, seemed to sense the change. The donkeys, those patient, enduring companions of the silk routes, found themselves with less and less work to do. Where once a good pack animal was worth its weight in silver, now many were sold for local farming work or simply turned loose to join the herds of wild donkeys that roamed the desert margins. There was something particularly moving about watching an old caravan donkey adapt to a sedentary life. These animals had been bred for travel, their hooves hardened by thousands of miles of rocky paths, their temperaments shaped by the need to remain calm in the face of sandstorms and predators. To see them standing in small village corrals, their days now measured not by the distance covered, but by the slow rotation of seasons, was to witness a kind of gentle tragedy. The bells that had once announced the approach of caravans from miles away now hung silent in workshops and homes, transformed from essential equipment into mere decoration. Children played with them sometimes, delighting in their clear musical tones. But the adults who heard these sounds experienced a different kind of pleasure, the bittersweet recognition of a melody that had once meant prosperity, adventure, and connection to the wider world. The transformation of the courtyard as darkness falls is nothing short of magical. Lanterns begin to appear as if by themselves, lamps with flames that dance behind panels of horn or colored glass, casting warm pools of light that turn the practical space of day into the enchanted realm of evening. The merchants who have stored their goods and settled their animals now emerge to participate in the ancient ritual of the night market, that daily resurrection of commerce that makes every caravanserai a temporary city. Carpets appear first, unrolled on the stone paving of the courtyard with the careful ceremony that fine textiles deserve. These are not the precious cargo pieces that will travel on 2 distant markets, but the merchant's personal rug straddle carpets chosen for the ability to transform any space into a temporary home. Each merchant spreads his carpet in a location that becomes his temporary shop, his reception room, his private domain within the larger community of the caravanserai. Hassan unrolls a carpet that has traveled with him for 7 years. Its pattern of interlocking stars and geometric flowers now softened by time and used into something approaching perfection. The colors have mellowed from their original brightness into subtle harmonies of deep blue and warm gold, madder red and saffron yellow. He arranges cushions borrowed from the caravanserai's common store around the edges of his carpet, creating a space that invites conversation and displays his smaller wares to best advantage. From his personal pack, Hassan produces a selection of his finest pieces, not for sale, necessarily, but for the evening ritual of display and discussion that oils the wheels of commerce more effectively than any amount of aggressive salesmanship. A small carpet with a pattern of flowering vines spreads across one corner of his space. Several ceramic pieces, cups, bowls, and a particularly beautiful teapot with a glaze the color of twilight arrange themselves as if naturally around the carpet's edges. Other merchants follow similar rituals, each creating a temporary world that reflects his personality and showcases his merchandise. A spice merchant arranges small cloth bags in neat rows, each tied with colored thread that indicates its contents. Even closed, the bags release tantalizing hints of their treasure cinnamon that warms the evening air. cardamom that adds its exotic perfume, black pepper that carries the promise of distant tropical shores where it grew under monsoon skies. A textile merchant displays silk scarves that flutter like butterflies in the evening breeze, their colors so pure and vivid they seem to generate their own light. These are not the heavy silks meant for formal robes, but the lighter weaves used for veils and wrappings. It's delicate as flower petals, but strong enough to survive the harsh conditions of desert travel. When the lantern light catches them at the right angle, they seem to glow from within, as if they've captured and concentrated the essence of the flowers and minerals used to dye them. The jewelry merchant opens, cases lined with black velvet, revealing treasures that seem almost too brilliant for the humble setting of a desert caravanserai. Silver bracelets catch and reflect the lamplight in dozens of tiny stars. Earrings set with turquoise and coral create their own small galaxies of color. Rings bearing intricate engravings transform fingers into canvases for miniature art. But perhaps most beautiful are the simple pieces silver chains worn smooth by generations of wear. Amber beads that glow like captured sunlight. Small amulets whose protective powers have been proven by safe. Journeys across dangerous lands. As the displays take shape and the lanterns multiply, the caravanserai courtyard transforms into something that exists nowhere else in the world, a market that appears each evening like a mirage, only to dissolve again with the dawn. This is commerce stripped of its urban pretensions and reduced to its essential elements. People with things to trade, gathering in a safe space to examine each other's offerings and negotiate exchanges that benefit everyone involved. The evening. Meal arrives carried by servants from the caravanserai kitchens, simple food, but prepared with the kind of attention that makes even plain rice and lentils taste like delicacies. The bread is still warm from the ovens, the stew fragrant with herbs that grow wild in the nearby mountains, the tea strong enough to cut through the day's accumulated dust and fatigue. Merchants gather in small groups around their carpets, sharing food and conversation in the relaxed atmosphere that comes after a day's work well done. Hassan produces his traveling teapot, not one of the pieces he trades, but his personal pot, seasoned by years of use into an instrument of near-perfect tea-making. He fills it with water from the well, adds tea leaves from his private store, and sets it over a small brazier that glows like a ruby in the gathering darkness. The ritual of tea preparation becomes a meditation, each step performed with the attention that transforms routine into ceremony. Other merchants notice the quality of Hassan's teapot and the skill of his preparation. Soon a small group has gathered around his carpet, drawn by the promise of superior tea and good conversation. This is how business is really conducted along the Silk Routes, not through aggressive bargaining or competitive display, but through the gradual building of trust and friendship that makes strangers into partners and partners into friends. The conversations that flow with the tea range across continents and centuries. A Persian merchant tells stories of the rose gardens around Isfahan, where the flowers bloom so profusely that their perfume can be detected from miles away. A Chinese trader describes the tea plantations of his homeland, where leaves are picked by monks who begin their work before dawn and finish their selection process in meditation that can last for hours. A Byzantine dealer in precious stones speaks of Constantinople's markets, where goods from the entire known world gather in bazaars that sprawl across acres of vaulted halls. But perhaps the most entrancing conversations are the ones that don't involve commerce, at all the stories that emerge when merchants forget their professional roles and speak simply as human beings who have seen wonders. Tales of cities that rise from desert sands like dreams made manifest. Descriptions of mountain passes where the air is so thin that prayer flags flutter in winds that seem to blow from heaven itself. Accounts of oasis towns where date palms provide shade for gardens that bloom with impossible beauty in the heart of absolute wilderness. As the night deepens and the last of the tea is consumed, the temporary market begins its gradual dissolution. Carpets are rolled up and stored. Precious objects disappear back into their protective wrappings. Lanterns are extinguished one by one until only a few remain to provide security lighting for the sleeping caravanserai. The merchants retire to their chambers, but the sense of community they've created lingers in the courtyard like incense. Blessing the space and preparing it for tomorrow evening's resurrection, Hassan performs his own ritual of closure, cleaning his teapot with precious water and wrapping it carefully in its traveling cloth. He checks once more on Kamar, finding the donkey drowsing peacefully in his stall, then retires to his chamber where his sleeping carpet awaits. Through the small window that faces the courtyard, he can see the last few merchants still engaged in quiet conversation, their voices barely audible above the whisper of night wind through the caravanserai's ancient walls. This is the miracle that happens every evening along the silk routes, the transformation of necessity into beauty, of commerce into community, of strangers into friends, sharing stories and tea under stars that have watched this same scene play out for 1,000 years. In the morning, the caravans will separate and continue their journeys toward different destinations. But tonight, in this temporary haven carved from the wilderness, the entire world seems contained within the walls of a single caravanserai, connected by the universal languages of hospitality, craftsmanship, and the simple human pleasure of good company at the end of a long day's journey. Morning arrives as it always does in the desert, not gradually, but suddenly, as if someone has drawn back an enormous curtain to reveal a world transformed by light. The eastern mountains, which last night were black silhouettes against the star-filled sky, now glow with colors that have no names in any human language: rose gold that shifts to copper, amber that deepens to bronze, purple shadows that retreat, like shy creatures, into the protective embrace of stone and cliff. In the caravanserai courtyard, the ancient ritual of departure begins before the merchants themselves are fully awake. Kamar stirs in his stall, his internal clock more reliable than any human timepiece, and releases the soft wicker that means day is coming. Time to load the precious cargo. Time to continue the endless journey that connects all the scattered pieces of the world. Their donkeys respond with their own morning greetings, a gentle chorus of anticipation that spreads through the animal quarters like the beginning of a familiar song. Hassan emerges from his chamber carrying his personal teapot, still warm from the morning tea that has become as essential to his daily routine as breathing itself. The courtyard is already stirring with the quiet activity of travelers, who know that the best hours for travel are those when the sun provides light without yet adding the burden of heat that will make midday passage across open desert an ordeal to be endured rather than a journey to be enjoyed. The loading ritual begins with the carpets always, the carpets first, because they provide the soft foundation upon which everything else will rest during the long day's travel. Hassan spreads Kamar's packed saddle across the donkey's patient back, adjusting the padding that will distribute the weight evenly across the animal's sturdy frame. The first layer consists of travel carpets, folded with the same care that librarians use when handling ancient manuscripts. Each fold calculated to prevent stress on the delicate fibers while creating the stable base that pottery and metalwork require. Next come the teapots, each one wrapped in its own protective cocoon of cotton cloth and soft leather, nested within baskets that have been woven specifically for this purpose by craftsmen who understand both the fragility of ceramic and the realities of long-distance transport. The baskets themselves are works of art made from reeds that grow beside oasis pools, woven in patterns that provide strength without unnecessary weight, lined with felt that absorbs shock and cushions their precious contents against the inevitable jolts and vibrations of desert travel, as Kamar accepts his burden with the stoic grace that has made donkeys the backbone of the silk routes for over a millennium. Hassan checks the balance with the expert eye of someone whose livelihood depends on his animal's comfort and safety. Too much weight on one side will cause sores and lameness. Too little attention to the load's distribution will result in shifted cargo and possibly damaged merchandise. But when everything is properly arranged, donkey and cargo achieve a harmony that transforms beast of burden into something approaching poetry in motion. Other merchants complete their own loading rituals throughout the courtyard, creating a symphony of preparation that has remained unchanged since the first caravan departed. From the first caravanserai, camels accept their massive loads with philosophical resignation, their expressions suggesting that they regard the entire enterprise of trade as a necessary but somewhat absurd human obsession. Horses dance and fidget, eager for the road there, energy contrasting sharply with the measured patience of their pack-animal companions. When the caravan master signals departure with a call that carries clearly across the courtyard, the procession begins to form in the order that experience has proven most effective. The camels lead, their long legs setting a pace that the shorter-legged donkeys can maintain without strain. Behind them come the donkey strings, each animal tethered to the one ahead by ropes that allow individual movement while maintaining the integrity of the group. Hassan and Kamar take their accustomed place in the middle of the column, surrounded by familiar companions who have shared dozens of similar journeys. The gates of the caravanserai swing open with a creak that speaks of centuries of similar departures, and the caravan moves out into the morning desert like a giant segmented creature whose individual parts work in perfect coordination toward a common goal. The rhythm establishes itself almost immediately, the soft percussion of hooves against packed earth, the gentle clink of bells and harness, the quiet conversations of merchants who walk beside their animals in the cool morning air. This is the rhythm that defines the Silk Routes more than any map or historical chronicle, the steady and hurried pace at which culture and commerce move across the vast distances that separate civilizations. It's a pace that allows for observation and reflection, for the gradual absorption of landscape, an experience that transforms mere transportation into something approaching pilgrimage. At this speed, the world reveals itself slowly, offering its secrets to those patient enough to receive them. The road itself seems to stretch endlessly ahead, a ribbon of packed earth that has been worn smooth by countless caravans over countless centuries. In some places, it's barely distinguishable from the surrounding landscape, marked only by the occasional pile of stones that indicates direction or warns of hazards ahead. In others, it's carved deeply into the earth, creating channels that guide travelers through mountain passes or around obstacles that would otherwise force lengthy detours. As the morning progresses and the sun climbs higher, the landscape begins its daily transformation from the cool blues and purples of dawn to the warm golds and reds of full daylight. The desert reveals its subtle beauties to those who know how to look, the delicate flowers that bloom briefly after rare rainstorms, the geometric patterns created by wind-blown sand, the way light plays across rock formations that seem to have been sculpted by artist gods who worked in stone and time. Kamar moves through this landscape with the steady confidence of an animal who has learned to read the desert's moods and respond to its requirements. His hooves find the surest footing automatically, avoiding the soft sand that would drain his energy and the sharp stones that could cause injury. His breathing adjusts to the gradually thinning air as the caravan climbs imperceptibly toward the mountain passes that lie the days ahead. Most importantly, his pace never varies, maintaining the rhythm that allows his cargo to ride smoothly despite the challenging terrain. The carpets on his back respond to this steady motion by settling more deeply into their folds, the natural oils in the wool beginning the slow process that will make them more supple and beautiful by the time they reach their destinations. Travel improves carpets the way experience improves wine, gradually, mysteriously, in ways that cannot be rushed or artificially induced. A carpet that has crossed the Silk Routes carries within its fibers not just the artistry of its maker, but the wisdom of the journey itself. The teapots, secure in their padded baskets, experience their own form of seasoning during the long days of travel. The constant gentle movement helps settle their clay bodies, relieving internal stresses that might otherwise cause cracking or warping. The gradual changes in altitude and humidity test their construction in ways that no workshop environment could duplicate, proving their worthiness for the demanding service they will provide in distant markets. As the day advances, the caravan passes landmarks that have guided travelers for generations. A distinctive rock formation that resembles a sleeping giant, a solitary tree that somehow finds enough water to survive an apparent wasteland, the ruins of an ancient watchtower, whose builders are remembered only through the enduring strength of their stonework. Each landmark carries its own stories, its own accumulated significance in the mental maps that guide merchants across the trackless distances of the ancient world. The midday halt comes when the sun reaches its zenith and the heat becomes too intense for comfortable travel. The caravan stops beside one of the countless wells that punctuate the trade routes. This one protected by a small shelter built from sun-dried bricks and roofed with palm fronds that provide blessed shade for travelers and their animals. The water, drawn up in leather buckets that have been softened by years of use, tastes of minerals and depth of the underground rivers that flow beneath the desert's arid surface. During the rest period, merchants check their animals and cargo, making small adjustments that will prevent problems later in the day. Hassan examines Kamar's hooves for stones or cuts, runs his hands along the donkey's legs, checking for heat or swelling that might indicate developing lameness, and adjusts the pack saddle to compensate for the way the load has settled during the morning's travel. These are the small rituals of care that make the difference between successful and disastrous journeys. The conversation during these midday breaks often turns to the road ahead, the passes they must cross, the cities they hope to reach, the markets where their carefully transported goods will find new owners. But there's also time for the slower, deeper discussions that arise naturally when people share hardships and wonders in equal measure. Stories emerge of previous journeys, of roads that have become impassable due to political upheaval or natural disaster, of new routes that offer promising opportunities for those brave enough to explore them. When the worst heat passes and shadows begin to lengthen, the caravan resumes its eastward progress. The afternoon rhythm is different from the morning's, more measured and contemplative as both animals and humans adjust to the accumulated fatigue of travel. But it's also when the landscape often reveals its most spectacular beauties, the play of light across distant mountains, the sudden appearance of green valleys that seem like miracles after hours of desert monotony, the gradual buildup of clouds that promise coolness, if not actual rain. The roads themselves seem to breathe during these afternoon hours, expanding slightly in the heat, releasing the sense of dust and distant vegetation that create the distinctive atmosphere of the silk routes. These are roads that have absorbed the hopes and dreams of countless travelers, that have been blessed by the prayers of pilgrims and merchants alike, that carry within their very substance the accumulated wishes of everyone who has ever sought fortune or enlightenment in distant lands. Even the routes themselves began to change character. Without the constant traffic of heavily loaded animals, the paths started to narrow. Desert sands, no longer regularly disturbed by hundreds of passing hooves, began to drift across the roads. In some places, particularly where the routes crossed areas of loose soil, the ancient highways disappeared entirely, leaving only subtle depressions in the earth to mark where merchants had once traveled. The oases, those crucial lifelines of desert travel, faced their own quiet transformation. With fewer travelers requiring water and provisions, some of the smaller oases were simply abandoned. Carefully maintained wells fell into disrepair. The date palms went unpruned. The small buildings that had sheltered merchants gradually succumbed to the patient forces of wind and sand. But perhaps the most profound change was in the flow of information. The silk routes had served as more than highways for goods. They had been the internet of their age, carrying news, ideas, technologies, and stories across vast distances. A merchant arriving in Baghdad might carry not only silk from China, but also news of distant wars, accounts of new inventions, and stories that would be retold in tea houses for generations. As the routes declined, this flow of information slowed to a trickle. Cities that had once been cosmopolitan centers of learning and culture began to turn inward, focusing on local concerns rather than distant opportunities. The great libraries of Central Asia, which had been enriched by manuscripts from across the known world, found fewer new works arriving. Scholars who had once debated ideas that originated in India, developed in Persia, and refined in Europe now found themselves working with increasingly limited resources. The languages along the routes began to change as well. The trading pidgins that had allowed merchants from different cultures to communicate started to disappear as there were fewer occasions to use them. Local languages reasserted their dominance, and the easy multilingualism that had characterized the great trading cities gradually faded. Yet there was a certain peace in this decline. a gentleness that spoke to the natural rhythms of history. Just as the great trade routes had emerged gradually, responding to the needs and opportunities of their time, their decline was equally organic. There was no single moment of ending, no dramatic final caravan, just a slow, steady reduction. In the music of bells, the diminishing echo of voices calling out prices in the bazaars, and the gradual return of silence to roads that had known 1,000 years of constant motion. The sunset that closed this particular day along the Silk Routes was the same sunset that had ended thousands of days before it, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, casting long shadows behind the increasingly rare travelers, and promising, as it always had, that tomorrow would bring another day of possibility, even if that possibility looked very different than it once had. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of our gentle journey along these ancient pathways. It's much like a traveler finally reaching the comfortable warmth of a familiar inn after a long day's walk. The donkeys we followed through desert and mountain pass have found their rest, their bells fallen silent in the peaceful darkness. The rugs that once carried the dreams of weavers and the hopes of merchants now lie folded in quiet corners, their colors muted by moonlight, their patterns holding secrets that need no longer be urgently shared. Think for a moment about the teapot that sits cooling on Ahmad's table in that Samarkand bazaar. The steam has long since stopped rising from its spout, but somehow it still radiates a gentle warmth, not the heat of boiling water, but something deeper and more lasting. This is the warmth of memory, of countless conversations shared over glasses of amber tea, of friendships formed across cultural boundaries, of the simple human pleasure of sitting together at the end of a difficult day. This teapot, like all the objects we've encountered on our journey, has become something more than its original purpose might suggest. It's no longer just a vessel for brewing tea. It has transformed into a keeper of stories, a silent witness to the great flowering and gentle fading of one of history's most remarkable networks of human connection. The Silk Routes teach us something profound in their very existence and their eventual decline. They remind us that all things, even the mightiest empires and the most essential trade networks, follow the same rhythm as the seasons. There is a time for growth and expansion, a time for full flowering, and eventually, a time for peaceful rest. This isn't a story of failure or loss, but rather a recognition of the natural cycles that govern all human endeavors. Consider the donkey who no longer carries precious cargo across impossible distances, but instead helps a village farmer tend his small plot of land. Has this donkey lost something, or has it simply found a different kind of purpose? Perhaps there's wisdom in both perspectives. The adventure and importance of long-distance trade has been exchanged for the quiet satisfaction of daily routine. The thrill of distant horizons traded for the comfort of familiar surroundings. The craftsman who once wove rugs for emperors and sultans now creates smaller works for local families. His skills haven't diminished, if anything. The slower pace allows for even greater attention to detail, even more care in the selection of each thread. The rug he completes today might not travel to a distant palace, but it will warm the floor, where children play and learn, where families gather for evening meals, where the small essential dramas of daily life unfold. There's something deeply comforting about this transformation, something that speaks to our need for both adventure and home, for both expansion and consolidation. The Silk Routes, in their prime, satisfied humanity's hunger for the new, the exotic, the challenging. In their decline, they offer us something equally valuable, a reminder that home and the simple pleasures of local community possess their own irreplaceable worth, as you settle deeper into whatever comfortable place you've chosen for listening to this story. Let your mind wander back along the paths we've traveled together. Feel the soft sand between your toes as you walk beside the last caravan. Listen to the distant sound of those bronze bells, growing fainter now, but never quite disappearing entirely. Smell the lingering aroma of spices in bazaars where fewer merchants gather, but where the ancient rituals of greeting and bargaining continue with undiminished courtesy. Picture yourself in Mahmud's tea house as he performs his evening ritual, lighting the charcoal beneath his magnificent samovar. The brass gleams in the lamplight, and even though there are fewer travelers to serve, he still prepares his tea with the same care his grandfather taught him. There's something profoundly peaceful about this dedication to craft and ritual even. When, or perhaps especially when, the original purpose has shifted, the water begins to simmer, and Mahmoud sets out his finest glasses, the ones with the delicate blue patterns. Tonight, like most nights, many of these glasses will remain unused, but that doesn't diminish the beauty of the ritual. If anything, it enhances it, transforming a simple commercial transaction into something approaching meditation, a quiet celebration of the possibility that tomorrow might bring unexpected visitors, new conversations, fresh stories to add to the countless others that have been shared within these walls. You're welcome here in this imaginary tea house. Welcome to take your place among the scattered cushions, to accept a glass of perfectly brewed mint tea, too. Listen to the gentle conversation of the few remaining patrons. The topics are smaller now than they once were: local harvests rather than distant markets, village concerns rather than imperial politics, but the fundamental human pleasure of shared company and comfortable discourse remains unchanged. Outside, the desert stretches away in all directions, painted silver by moonlight. The ancient roads are still there, though they're narrower now, less frequently traveled. But they endure, patient as the desert itself, ready to carry whatever travelers might still choose to walk them. The mountains that witnessed countless caravans continue their eternal watch, indifferent to human schedules but somehow comforting in their permanence. In some distant city, perhaps Baghdad or Constantinople, a merchant's widow might be looking through her late husband's effects, finding among them a small silk scarf he brought back from Kashgar decades ago. The silk has faded slightly, but it's still beautiful, still soft to the touch. She wraps it around her shoulders, feeling through this simple gesture a connection not just to her husband's memory, but to the anonymous hands that grew the silkworms, spun the thread, wove the fabric, dyed it in those particular shades of blue and gold. This is how the silk roots live on, not in the grand movements of armies and empires, but in these small, intimate connections, these objects that carry with them the accumulated touch of many hands, many cultures, many hopes and dreams. Roots may have faded as commercial enterprises, but they persist as networks of human connection. As proof that distance and difference need not prevent understanding and appreciation, the donkey bell that now hangs in a village home might ring. Occasionally when a child plays with it, and in that clear musical tone, something of the great caravans lives on. The rug spread on a family's floor carries within its patterns the aesthetic sensibilities of a dozen cultures, a testament to the human ability to find beauty that transcends any single tradition. As sleep begins to claim you, and sleep should be claiming you by now, gently and without resistance, let yourself imagine that you're lying on such a rug, its wool soft beneath you, its patterns seeming to shift and flow in the uncertain light between waking and dreams. You're comfortable here, safe and warm, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of generations of travelers who understood that the true treasure of any journey isn't what you carry with you, but what you discover about the fundamental connectedness of all human experience. The last caravan has passed, its bells fading into the distance. The final merchant has closed his stall, carefully folding his most precious rugs, banking the coals under his samovar until tomorrow. The ancient roads settle into silence, patient and enduring, holding their stories close like well-kept secrets. And you, dear traveler, you who have walked with us along these paths of memory and imagination, you too can rest now. Let the gentle rhythm of your breathing match the slow, steady pace of desert winds. Let your dreams carry you further along roads we haven't explored together. It's two tea houses and bazaars that exist now only in the realm of sleep and possibility. The silk roots are sleeping too, dreaming perhaps of the days when they bustled with activity, when their importance was measured in the tons of precious cargo they carried and the fortunes they made possible. But in their dreams, as in ours, there's room for a different kind of value, the value of stories shared, of friendships formed across vast distances, the simple human pleasure of discovering that the world is both larger and smaller than we imagine, both more exotic and more familiar than our limited experience might suggest. Sleep well, gentle traveler. The roads will still be there when you wake, patient as always, ready to carry new dreamers toward whatever horizons call to them. And somewhere in the distance, so faint you might think you're imagining it, the sound of bronze bells continues, marking time with the rhythm of footsteps that echo across centuries, carrying us all toward rest, toward peace, toward the comfortable certainty that every journey, no matter how long or challenging, eventually leads us home.